Hello everyone, Happy New Year to you. Mark Latham here. I thought I'd do a report on something that I've seen on jw.org, and yes, governing body, I am going to be using fair use on this particular posting, and also I'm going to be looking at some of the quotes that you have put on your front page to obviously strengthen your argument regarding the use of blood transfusions. Now, the whole purpose of this particular posting, a message to those that are already out of the Jehovah's Witnesses and those that are still in, is to encourage everybody to keep researching and looking at everything that the Watchtower is trying to promote. And what I mean by looking at everything is to actually do some research, to look into this stuff and find out for yourself whether or not what they're actually explaining or trying to explain is truthful. And if it's truthful, is it in context to everything else that the experts are actually saying? Now, we all know that the Watchtower has a very bad reputation for misquoting people through the decades. And what I would say on this one is that whether or not it's a misquote or not, it's certainly very deceiving in the front page of their particular argument about blood. I'm looking at their JW.org on my computer right at this moment, and it says blood transfusions. What doctors are saying now. So those are the first words you see on the title. Go to it yourself, review it and see what you think. Now, as you start to look down the page, you've also got it on audio here, and I've decided to just play this one part. So bear with me on this as we now play this part of what doctors are saying now.
White blood transfusion. The spring 2013 issue of the journal Stanford Medicine Magazine, a publication of the Stanford University School of Medicine, contained a special report on blood, part of which was entitled Against the Flow: What's Behind the Decline in Blood Transfusions? The author of that article, Sarah C.P. Williams, states, "Over the past decade, a growing body of research has revealed that in hospitals around the world, donated blood is used more often and in larger quantities than is needed to help patients, both in operating rooms and hospital wards." The author quotes Patricia Ford, M.D., founder and director of the Center for Bloodless Medicine and Surgery at Pennsylvania Hospital. Dr. Ford said, "There's this idea ingrained in the culture of medicine that people will die if they don't have a certain level of blood, that blood is the ultimate lifesaver. That's true in some specific situations, but for most patients, in most situations, it's just not true." Dr. Ford.
Okay, now if you read the front page of that particular article, that the way that they're quoting it there, it sounds quite feasible. That's exactly what's being said. But I actually went a bit further than that. I thought, well, okay, if that's what they're saying, I'm going to go to the Stanford Medicine archives. I'm going to look up this magazine that they're talking about, the Stanford magazine, and I'm going to find it for myself and read it. And I want to find these quotes that they've printed. And that's exactly what I've done. So here is the special report. It says on the computer there on jw.org that this is a special report. Okay, so there's the special report. You can download this yourself. Just go into the Stanford magazine and just find this particular quote. You'll find that within the document itself, as it starts to go down, it's 1, 2, 3, it's about 4 paragraphs down, the one that they're quoting. Okay, and you've got to remember, this is all about, what they're trying to say is that blood, you don't need it. You really don't need it. For the average Jehovah's Witnesses looking at this, thinking, I'm going to follow what the society is saying, I don't need blood. There's other ways, there's alternatives to blood. And that's what they're quoting from these experts as saying, that there is no alternative. This is the way forward. The blood isn't needed. Now, that's the message I get from the front page of jw.org on this particular issue. Once you download this and read it for yourself, you see something very different. Now, once again, quoting what they're saying there, they're quoting that in the Stanford Medicine magazine, which is the one I have here, that you can look at the Stanford University School of Medicine. It contains a special report on blood. Here is the special report on blood. Okay? And it then goes on about the Against the Flow, What's Behind the Decline in Blood Transfusions by Sarah C.P. Williams. Well, boy, it's in there, as I've just pointed out, 5th paragraph down. But before we even get to that, this special report also has 7 other interesting articles that you can read, and I would encourage all witnesses to read all of the articles. But on the second one down, which is just here, of this special report, let's just get right down to brass tacks, shall we? That particular one, of the same magazine that the Watchtower is quoting, has an article that says, roll up your sleeve, there's still no substitute for blood. Now that's the second one down. If you're looking for the Against the Flow, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th one down. But let's just look at the Against the Flow one and find out exactly what that's talking about. Okay, here we go. Bear with me as we go through this together. It's talking about here, there's a professor by the name of Maggio, and starts off by talking about he's a trauma surgeon, and he's a co-director of critical care medicine at Stanford Hospital. This is a guy that knows what he's talking about. Okay, now a lot of the stuff that he's talking about at this early stage is about the management of blood. Okay, so this is talking about salvage devices that we used for many years now, but they've become more appropriate to use a salvage device. So when it comes to cell salvage, your own blood can be actually withdrawn from your body and actually used as a way of assisting in your own surgery. Now, what I'm trying to get at here also is the fact that in this particular case that they're talking about, there's this guy that's had a very serious accident, and he lost about 2 litres of blood, but it was actually in his belly. He was bleeding internally into his belly. So what Maggio did all that time ago, because of this motorcycle crash victim, was to salvage the blood. And that's exactly what he did. He took all the debris out of it, and they recycled it and put it back into this particular patient's bloodstream. And what he's actually talking about there is that over the past, and I quote part of this, is but over the past decade, a growing body of research has revealed that in hospitals around the world, donated blood is used more often and in larger quantities than is needed to help patients, both in operating rooms and hospital wards. That's what they're printing and on the front page of this particular page. But if you look at exactly what's going on here, this is talking about the management of blood. This is talking about all of those things that can help to reduce costs. Is it totally necessary for an individual to have a blood transfusion? And that is exactly what this document is talking about. The premise of it is about not saying we are not going to give a blood transfusion. It's talking about whether or not you actually necessarily need one. It's a common known fact that many surgeons quite often pump blood into people, and it's totally unnecessary. And that is also brought out by these particular specialists within this document. But as you go through it, there are many other things that are also used and shouldn't be used. For instance, it talks here about the American Medical Association brought attention to the subject last fall at its national summit on the overuse of 5 medical treatments. Blood transfusions was one of them that was on the list. Heart stents was another. Ear tubes was another. Antibiotics, very important one, was another. And also the inducing of birth in pregnant women was another. Things being used too much within the hospital fields. And so there's been a need and a revolution, shall we say, and if you read this document, it's fascinating about how they've started to, let's say, become more economical with blood transfusions, looking at ways of working out whether or not treatment through a blood transfusion is totally necessary. And there are various different ways that they've done that within this document that is quoted by jw.org. Now, as we go through some of these, there are three different reasons that often why people need a blood transfusion. One is because they lose blood from major surgery, and that's scheduled for weeks, or what's known as elective surgery. They might have a need to have surgery, and so they lose blood. So there's a need to manage that properly. Two, they lose blood in a way that their body won't be able to replace it, and that could be through some form of blood cancer, and where it shuts down the body's ability to make its own blood. And three, the loss of blood through a sudden trauma, either an external wound or internal bleeding. So three different types there. Now, what makes it interesting is it does talk about Jehovah's Witnesses in this document, and that over 700 witnesses whose religion prohibits transfusions were used and have been studied very critically, and they have. And it's very clear that with a lot of management in especially elective surgery, that many of the patients could actually find themselves recovering quicker, better. Reasons being, it talks in here about one of those reasons being the care that they were given before the surgery, such as their hemoglobin levels, for instance. Were they high enough for the surgery? If they weren't, were their iron levels and their vitamin levels pumped into them before surgery to help them produce the higher levels of hemoglobin that they would need after surgery to produce the blood levels that they'd need to rejuvenate their bodies. Just one example within this document. There's also the talk there of the actual rejuvenation of self-salvage. One of the things that you, Jehovah's Witnesses, are still told within this document, shall I refuse it or accept it, self-salvage. And yet here, within these same specialists, within this same document, they highly recommend it. It's a very common way now of allowing an individual to have his own or her own blood back into the body as a result of it being salvaged, managed correctly. Now, according to this particular page, they're even saying to you, even in this document, that's down to your conscience whether or not you're going to allow it back into your body, your own blood. I mean, that's another subject altogether. But if we're going on talking about bloodless surgery, it talks here that Ford emphasizes the conservation of blood during surgery, often by using an intraoperative cell salvage device. Patients can also donate blood in the weeks leading up to the scheduled surgery. This is commonplace now. All right, this is all part of the same document. What am I getting at here? Quite clearly, they've taken a couple of quotes from this particular special edition that I now have in front of me, and they've decided to make it a bloodless surgery argument, when quite clearly within this special report it's anything but. Once you've read the whole document, you realize that what they're saying is that blood is essential. Donations are essential. Let's just read and make a couple of quotes on that before we get to the case of trauma. It says here, whatever the motivation for the decrease in blood use and whatever the pace of the decline, the outcome of using less blood is conserved resources, saved money, and, based on the recent studies, improved patient health, where they've got elective surgery and you can actually plan for it. It can help your recovery quicker. No argument there. But the blood transfusion issue is not being told here that it's a non-starter. Quite the opposite. How do I know? Well, cases of trauma. It says, in some emergency situations, though, patients will always need blood transfusions. That's not me saying that. These are the same people that they're reporting on. Okay? So this document that they're using to say that you don't need a blood transfusion. If you read through the paragraphs, it says, in some emergency situations though, patients will always need blood transfusions. Always. Despite years of research, no safe substitutes for real human blood have been developed that can help patients in cases of blood loss. Substitutes that showed promise in the 1990s failed to in clinical trials after leading to increases in mortality rates and adverse outcomes such as heart attacks, and exciting early prospects have led to disappointment time after time. As recently as the early 2000s, the compound polyheme was generating excitement and being tested in phase 3 clinical trials. But the trials were halted in 2006, citing an increase in patient deaths when relying on the blood substitute and temporarily at least closing the door on artificial blood. So today doctors continue to depend on donated blood from blood banks when they're dealing with major emergency blood loss. And we've already talked about the way that those can happen. It could be through cancer. It could be through trauma, car accidents, bike accidents, internal bleeding, hemorrhaging. You need blood. And it could also be through elective surgery, where that surgery is just so vital that a lot of blood is lost. And so what this document is talking about was the management of that and conserving costs. Even in these trauma situations, however, where it is clear that the need for blood is not going away anytime soon, doctors are constantly researching the best ways to use blood products to help patients survive. When should blood be given? How much? What mixture of blood components should a transfusion consist of? And then we go back to Maggio. Do you remember the guy at the beginning, the surgeon? What we're doing is coming up with massive transfusion protocols to help physicians administer blood products in the right ratios, says critical care specialist Maggio. While most blood transfusions, those that are discussed above, consist of red blood cells, there are other components of blood that may need to be replaced in patients suffering massive blood loss. So the mixture typically given to trauma patients has 3 ingredients. Then it talks about the red cells, the plasma and the white cells, looking at especially looking at the plasma that gives off the contains of only waters, sugars and proteins and fats. And it goes on and on and on. They've even come up now with ideas of this massive transfusion protocol. So that what this document is also then talking about is not saying we're going to get rid of blood transfusions. What it's saying is we're going to make blood transfusions more manageable, more cost effective. And not only cost effective, but it is actually necessary for the patient, because many surgeons out there throw it into a body when it's not needed. It's also acknowledging within this same document that they are quoting that blood is absolutely necessary to sustain life in trauma situations. It also talks there about the hemoglobin levels as well. Right, okay, I'm going to finish on that part just for this second. So, thank you for bearing with me on this. What I wanted to get at here was that they quoted something. I've downloaded it. You can download it. Have a look at it. Read through it and tell me what you think of that document. Because as far as I'm concerned, that whole document is pro blood transfusion, not anti blood transfusion. It's also looking at healthcare of the patient before surgery and after surgery. But when it comes to the emergency use of blood transfusions, there is no substitute. And as we've already pointed out at the front of that document, it makes it very clear in the special report that they're quoting that you have to roll up your sleeve, and there's still no substitute for blood. Now, one other thing I just wanted to bring out, because it's really got my claw, and it's regarding this whole area of blood transfusions. If you go down to the bottom, it says, what does the Bible say about blood transfusions? You click on that and it gives interesting scriptures that we all know about, those Genesis, Leviticus, Acts chapter 15. But there's one I hadn't noticed before. Colossians chapter 1 and verse 20. And what that says in Colossians chapter 1 verse 20, and this is why does God command us to abstain from blood? Why does God command us to abstain from blood? Okay. English Standard Version I've got here. Is it? Yeah. The English Standard Version. Colossians 1:20, and it says this. It's talking about the preeminence of Christ. And verse 20 says, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. Let me just read that again. This is a command that they're using why you can't have blood. That through him to reconcile him to himself, all things whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. So because Jesus has shed his blood for all of us, for that one time only, there was no need for anybody else to sacrifice their own blood. There was no need to sacrifice your life for anything else. Because according to Colossians there, the blood that he shed, and the preeminence is talking about there within those further verses, makes it very clear. This was done for everybody and for all time. And yet here we have a question with that scripture being used. Why does God command us to abstain from blood? And they're using Colossians chapter 1 verse 20 as a reason why you should not have blood. Because Jesus shed his blood, therefore you should not use blood to save your life. Does Jesus want you to sacrifice yourself for not having a blood transfusion? Do you know, I see some sick things like that when I see that, and to me that is so perverted, so misapplied in Scripture, that they've used something so beautiful and so wonderful that it can be accepted for all of us, especially those that are Christian would understand this, and then they misapply it by saying because he sacrificed himself, you must sacrifice yourself rather than take a blood transfusion. And that's how they've applied that scripture. It's incredible. I just wanted to say that because I find that more upsetting than the misleading half quotes that they give within the other stuff. So just to finish off, please, whenever you're seeing this stuff, go on jw.org, find the links, and then do your research. Cut and paste it, put it in Google, get up the documents yourself and read through them and study them. Take your time to read them from beginning to end. And by the end of that, you'll have a conclusion as to what I'm talking about here. This is not anti-blood transfusion. This is pro-blood transfusion. They're just misquoting or using snippets from a quote without giving the full generalization about what that document was talking about. This is your life we're talking about here. This is your children's lives we're talking about here. Don't allow these people to stop you from making an informed choice about blood. It's not worth it. Do not take these faceless people on face value. Do your research. Thank you for listening.